Once I learned French fairly well, I felt guilty if ever I read an English translation of anything that was originally in French. Over the years, I've studied a fair number of other languages and enjoyed the distinctive flavor of each one. Japanese friends often ask me how many languages I know. This is a normal question, but I have great difficulty in answering because I've forgotten most of the language I once knew. I would have immense difficulty in reading in the original a Greek tragedy, though I still have the textbooks I used when I was studying Greek, and there are places which I've written in pencil difficult words I didn't know, which suggests that I read Greek well enough to be able to manage with so little help. I can still read Spanish without much difficulty, but I've completely lost my facility in talking Spanish. I was never fluent in Chinese, but I distinctly remember talking with Chinese people and understanding their replies. Now I would have difficulty in saying even a single sentence. I have loved these languages and all the others I've studied, even those I've completely forgotten. Perhaps a hypnotist could find them still hiding in my subconscious. My love for Japanese, of course, is quite another matter. I suppose that learning Japanese was the most essential element in my whole life. Not only did it enable me to write the books I have published, but it has contributed enormously to my aesthetic preferences. The pictures on the walls of my apartment, the ceramics on every flat surface of the apartment contain not one object of non-Asian origin. I did not consciously choose to exclude European or American works of art. But Asian art, especially Japanese art, was what I wanted around me when I furnished an apartment of my own. Nothing in the house in which I grew up had anything to do with Asia except for the Chinese rug that my father bought in 1928, just before the crash in the stock market that ushered in the Great Depression. The one aspect of my aesthetic preferences that have not been affected by Japan is music. I by no means dislike traditional Japanese music, but I do not feel the need for it that I feel for Western classical music. I can be moved by gagaku music, but not by the shakuhachi, and seldom by the samisen. I deeply appreciate the no drama, and when a play ends, I may feel extremely moved, but I have no recollection of the music, nothing to whistle on the way out of the theater. Perhaps my assimilation into Japanese culture has been less complete than I like to think, but I gather that some Japanese share the same feelings. The only books that I've ever published that have nothing to do with Japan are two that I've written about opera. I confess that despite my love of the Japanese language, I prefer to hear an Italian opera sung in Italian rather than in Japanese, with watashi wa. I suppose that no matter how deeply one loves a foreign language, one never really feels it as deeply as one's own. Some writers, like Joseph Conrad, have chosen to write major works in a foreign language and succeeded brilliantly. But there are not many such examples, and would be a very rare man indeed who, when burning with anger, would curse in a foreign language. I began to write articles in Japanese when I was 31, living in Kyoto. The editor of a literary magazine asked me for an article. I think it was on translations of the tale of Genji. I was told that I could write it in English if I submitted it before the deadline, but otherwise I would have to write it in Japanese. For some reason, I was unable to meet the deadline and had to write it in Japanese. Although I was aware from my reading in recent Japanese publications that a new system of orthography was now more or less compulsory, but having had no experience of writing post-war Japanese, I decided to use the traditional orthography that I had learned in the U.S. Navy Japanese language school, that is to say, Kyu Kanazakai and Honji. The Japanese I had learned was somewhat dated by 1953, but I could not help but feel that the traditional orthography was superior. The editor, to my annoyance, disagreed. He changed everything. I have since written articles on many subjects in Japanese, and I almost daily write letters in Japanese. Some people have even praised my style, but I'm definitely not a second Joseph Conrad. Other people ask me why I don't write everything in Japanese. The answer is simple. It would take me considerably more time, and there's always the chance that I would not use the normal idiomatic Japanese phrase. Another, more compelling reason for not writing books in Japanese is that I have been extremely fortunate in my translators, especially three, Kanoseki Isao, Tokuoka Takao, and Kakuchi Yukio. They have not only rendered my English text into fluent and graceful Japanese, but on numerous occasions have discovered mistakes I have made. I'm deeply grateful to all three. They translated my writings when they might have been writing their own books. I hope they do not regret having made this choice. I, of course, fully recognize the importance of translation, but I have sometimes been rather annoyed when people identify me as a translator of Japanese. Of course I'm a translator, but I like to think of myself as being also a critic and a historian. Perhaps this is a mistake. I sometimes wonder whether I could have written anything of interest if I didn't know Japanese. Those who like my work have sometimes suggested that I switch to some other literature, one that is of greater interest to the Western public than Japanese literature. Why don't you write something about French literature or Italian literature, they ask. I have never felt much temptation to write about any other literature. But many years ago, I thought the time had come for me to write a novel. I spent a month writing the novel, day and night. I stopped halfway through and read what I had written up to this point. It was definitely not a masterpiece. I could not escape the realization that rather than add one more novel to the stacks of novels published every day, my time and energy would be better spent translating Japanese works that were of unquestionable importance. Perhaps I was overly modest or even cowardly, but I have not regretted this decision. I now feel more certain that being a translator is a worthy profession. I'm fully aware that even though I've spent many years in Japan, my Japanese is far from perfect. I have met many non-Japanese who, after a relatively brief stay in Japan, speak Japanese more convincingly than myself. This, of course, irritates me. I'm particularly irritated when some word or phrase that I know perfectly well fails at a crucial moment to come to my lips. But this annoyance with myself does not affect my love for the Japanese language. I have read many times with students such masterpieces as Hojoki, Oku no Osamichi,